64a at the Mishnah. It says Pesach nishchat b'shalish kitas. Korban Pesach is shechted in three groups. It means there were. We'll see more what that means. But there were three sessions in the temple. Shenemar, as it says, b'shachtu eisa kol kala das Yisrael. It was slaughtered and you should slaughter it all of the congregation of Israel. Now there's three expressions there. There's kahal, the Eidah of Yisrael. We happen to know that each one is 10, or Eidah is 10, so it's going to tell us how many. But whatever the case is, this is three groups. All right. Okay. The first group entered in the Azara would fill up. The Azara means the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. Nalu dalsis Azara. The doors of the Azara would get closed. We'll see it's Machlekes Abaye V'Rava what that means. Taku, Hariyu, V'Taku. They would blow the shofar. Was it a shofar or trumpets? I don't remember. And it was a tekiah, a true and a tekiah. HaKayanim Eindim Shir Shiras. The Kayanim stood in two rows. It would be a dayam, maybe it means many rows. It would be a dayam, baziche kesa, baziche zav. They had bowls of silver and bowls of gold. In other words, each row, shur shekula kesef, shur shekula zav, zav. It would be an entire row would have the same type of utensil. And they wouldn't mix them. The bowls that they had did not have bottoms. That meant that there was a pointy bottom, there was a cone shape. Unless they put it down, and then the blood would congeal, because if you're able to put it down, you may end up putting it down and getting sidetracked with something else. Shachat Yisrael, the Kibbutz Kayin. Yisrael shechts, and the Kayin receives the blood. Now, it doesn't need to be Yisrael. The Gemara is going to tell us, but that's the Chiddush, that Yisrael is allowed to shech. A Kayin receives the blood because a Kayin is the one that needs to receive the blood, not a Yisrael. And he gives it to his friend. So notice he passes it over because they were standing in rows. So it's like a production line. And his friends give it to his friend. And he receives the full one and he returns an empty one. The Gemara is going to tell us that he has to receive the full one first because you have a mitzvah that came to your hand and you have to do it right away. The Kayin that's closest to the Mizbeach, he's the one that would do one sprinkling, matanachas, that's what we say in Kavanas, right? It says matanachas, bilvachit keneged yisod, right? It needs to be on one of the edges of the Mizbeach that has the yisod. The yisod only goes along the west in the north. It's not on the east and the south. The south has the ramp, but it needs to be somewhere along that side. So, okay, somewhere along those two sides of the mizbeach. We say over here that it's a zrika. We see in the Gemara there's an opinion that held that it was a shvicha, that it was poured. Here we say that it was sprinkled. And poured would have been just to pour it on the base. Sprinkle means that it's like splashed. The first group exits and the second group comes in. The second group exits and the third group comes in. The way that it was performed in the first one, that's how it's performed in the second and the third. They recited the Hallel. This is referring to each group. Each group would recite the Hallel. In Gamru, if they finished the Hallel, Shanu, they repeated it. Im Shanu, if they repeated it, Shalshu, they said it a third time. Even though they never needed to say it 3 times because the Kainim worked so fast. Rabbi Yehuda Aimer Mimem Shel Kat Shlishas Le'Gil Hafti Kiyishma Hashem Pnei She'ama Moatim. In the third group, they never reached a Hafti. A Hafti is one of the paragraphs of the Hallel, because everyone tried to get into the first groups. So the first groups were the ones that were really packed. And the third group was going to be much smaller. So they were able to complete the whole service before they reached the Hafti. Now it depends who the Chasam was. It doesn't tell me how fast they were. What was that? Oh, the Eshte oven, yeah. That's right. That's right. Right.
Do you know who came in and stood in the Azara? Was it one representative of the?
I assume so. I assume so. It was just a representative of the group. No. What it means is that there was a representative from each group that came in with their sacrifice. The Hallel was being recited by the people that were standing on the Mamadas. No, who do you mean by all? No, over here it's just saying that the people that were in the Hallel was recited by the people in the Azara as part of the service of the. No, all the people that were. There's 2 groups. There's groups that are. We said there's 3 groups. Okay, that would come into the Azara. Then there was each group of those 3, they were those groups were made up of representatives of individual Korban Pesach groups.
So it's a little hard to think about how these numbers work.
Okay. We're going to see. I know it's complicated.
Well, no, not complicated, just challenging. Given the number of Jewish people and how many people could be in a Chavarah if there are only 3 groups, how many thousands of people were getting into the Azara with a little Shepselah?
Right.
I mean, I've never read that this is one of the miracles of the Beis Hamikdash. And
Right. We'll see on the next page. We'll see a little bit more to confuse us. You'll see on the next page. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda says they never reached the Hafti because everyone wanted to be in the first 2. The way that this was performed in the weekday, that's how it was performed on Shabbos. There was only one thing, that the Kainim would wash the floor. How would they wash the floor? They would, what was that? With Kleenex? No, they would plug up there was a stream that went through the Azara. They would put a plug into the stream, so it would just, it would go up, and then they would, what's it called? Yeah, and then they would let it drain, and that would, okay. Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, so on Shabbos it was Shalei Baratzim Chacham, was against the will of the sages. The sages did not want them to watch the Azara, but they did it anyway. Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Kaisei Memala Midama Taruvas. Rabbi Yehuda says, very interesting, they would fill up a cup from the floor of the Azara, from the blood, and they would sprinkle it. Zarkus Rikachas al Gabi Mizbeach. And they would do one sprinkling on the Mizbeach. Rabbi Yehuda is going to explain, maybe one carbon, the blood spilled, and you were able to rectify that by taking it off the floor and sprinkling that, because in the mixture, maybe you got the blood that spilled. So there was all this mixed blood on the floor. You would take one cup full and sprinkle it on the Mizbeach. The sages didn't agree to that. Ketzad Taylor and Mafshitin. How would they hang it up and skin the animal? So Unkle Shel Barzilai Klum B'Ksalim Uba Mudim Shabem Taylor Mafshitin. There were hooks, iron hooks that were kavua, that were permanent in the wall, were stuck into the wall and into the posts. That on these they would hang it and they were able to pull off the skin. If someone didn't have a place where to hang his up, it was like a packed mikveh, right? So there's nowhere to put your things. So makalis dakim b'chalakim ayasham miniach al ksefay balkasech chaver v'tel mapshet. There were sticks that they would put it across their shoulders from one person to his friend. They would hang it on over that stick, and they were able to both together probably pull the skin off. Rabbi Eliezer Eimer, Yudalid Shecholius b'Shabbos. If the Erev Pesach was Shabbos, Miniach Yadei al Kasef Chaver V'Yad Chaveri al Ksefay. They would just put it over their arms. They would link across their arms, one on the other person's shoulder, and that person on his shoulder, and they would hang it over their arms because these sticks were considered mukta. Karu v'haitzia seimurav. They tore the animal open and they took out the innards. Nasnim b'megas, they put it into a plate, into a bowl. And they offered it on the mizbeach. Now, the ktiran doesn't mean that the people that were skinning it offered it. It means that the kayanim came and a kayan didn't need to skin it. That other people could have done. But then it was offered on the mizbeach, of course, by a kayan. The first group went out and they sat on the harabayas. That's referring to on Shabbos, because they had to wait around. They couldn't walk home with their animals. Became how they get there on Shabbos. The animals walk. They couldn't carry it. The animal walked on Shabbos, but they couldn't get it back because it can't walk now. The second group stayed in the Chel. The third group waited in Zara. It got dark. They went out and they roasted their Korban Pesach. Why? Because it was on Shabbos. They had to wait for Motzei Shabbos to roast their Korban Pesach. So we said to wait for that evening. Yeah, the Seder would start late that night. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak says, "Eina Pesach nishchar ela b'gimel kita shel shleishim b'nei Adam." Rabbi Yitzchak says each group needed to have 30. My timer, Kal ve'edav Yisrael. It says those three verses: Kol Kal Adas Yisrael. That's what we quoted in the Mishnah. Now Masafkalan ibavasachas ibazachazeh. We learned that pasuk was telling me that it was three separate groups. That taught me that there's three groups. Turns out that that's not the whole point over here. We're learning from this that it could be that each group needed to have Kal ve'eda of Yisrael. If it's supposed to be all together, Kal, Eda, and Yisrael in one group, you have 30. And if it's one after the other, so you have three groups. Hilkach turns out, you could really use 50. No, 50 means a total of 50. Why? Because 30 go in. The Aili Klasin Vavdi. 30 go in and they do their Korban Pesach. Aili Asar V'Nafki Asara. 10 go in and 10 go out. So the next group has also 30. All right. Aili Asar V'Nafki Asara. And then 10 go in and 10 go out. And the third group also has 30. So it's just giving me an example of how 50 people could be 30 with the new group of 10 coming in. In other words, instead of 90 people, you could get away with 50. Yeah. First group came in, and then they closed the doors of the Azara. Itmar was stated by Amarim, Abayam Ninalutanan, that the doors of the Azara were closed. What does it mean the word closed? It means they didn't close it. They're closed by miracle. The doors just closed. Rabba Amar Nailantanan. Rabba said no, they actually closed the doors of the Azara. My Benai, what's the difference? They needed to have three groups. Now, if according to Rava, what they're doing is they looked outside, they said, look, how many people are there? Okay, let's close it now. So we'll estimate how many people will be in the next group and how many will be in the third group. So fine, but according to Abaya, they didn't do that. The doors would close on their own. And whenever the doors close, that's when the group stopped. So Abaya Lutinan, Kamada Aili, Malu, however many come in is good, and we'll rely on the miracle for the doors to close. Rabba says no, they close the doors. You can't rely on a miracle. The Mefarshim ask, if according to Abaya they can rely on a miracle, so why did they have to prepare another Kain Gadol and Yom Kippur in case this one became Tamei? Rely on a miracle. Rely on miracles. Don't do any. Don't take any precautions. You say, well, that could be because he would become tummy because there was something wrong in his service. It can't rely on miracles when it comes to a person's own avodah, person's own level. We rely on miracles when it comes to things that a person doesn't have any that is not obligated to put effort in. Okay. V'had Tanan, the problem. This that it says in the Mishnah, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Chas v'shalom shekabi ben Malal nisnada, she'ein azar nenelas al kol adam Yisrael b'chachma v'yer state kakavi ben Malal. Very interesting. This is a Mishnah in Idias. The Mishnah says, Idias is so
I've never heard it pronounced that way.
Oh, Adius?
Ediot, I've heard it pronounced Ediot. I've never heard it pronounced idiot.
Idios. So over there it says that you don't do the Saita water. You don't have the Saita water given to a convert or a slave woman that was released, also a convert. Now they said, 1 second. This is a testimony by Akavi ben Malala. They said, 1 second. We have a story with a woman by the name of Karkamis that Shmaya Naftalian gave her to drink the Saita water. So Akavi ben Malala says that Shmaya Naftalian gave it to her. They were converts just like she was. He made like a derogatory comment about them. Now, it says that they put him in Chayrim when he made that comment. So, because Shmaya and Naftali were descendants of converts. Or maybe they were converts, yeah. Either they were converts or they were descendants of converts. So he said, oh, he served it to someone that was similar to them. Now, Rabbi Yehuda comes along and says, Chas v'shalom, that Akavi ben Malal said that was put in Chayrim. It must have been someone else. His expression is, Chas v'shalom she'Akavi ben Malal nisnada. God forbid that Akavi ben Malal was put in Chayrim. She'ein azar nenelas al kol adam Yisrael b'chachma v'yer state k'Akavi ben Malal. When the doors would close on the Azara, and there was such a big crowd in there was no one as great as Akavi ben Malala in Chachma and in Yeraschei. Now you're going to tell me he was put in Chayrim. He was the greatest of the whole group, of everyone that was there. So when it says the doors would close, what is it referring to? The doors would close, according to Abaya, means the doors would close miraculously. Abaya matar satamei, Rabba matar satamei. Abaye explains according to his reason that the doors would close naturally, miraculously. I'm sorry, Yossi. So Rabbi Yehuda is the one that says that Akavi ben Malal was not put in Cherem, and based on his expression, Abaye and Rava. Oh, that's a good question.
That's my question also. Whatever that question was, my question.
It depends if it was hurricane proof. Storm. The doors swung in. And then the doors would naturally close. Yeah. Right. Right. The doors opened inward. At least in the Heichel, they opened inward. I don't know the other doors. Yeah, Avram Nassim is suggesting that the room would fill up, and because the doors opened inward, so as it filled up, the doors would end up getting closed.
Avram Nassim and Yitzi.
And Yitzi, right. Okay. So Rabbi says that translates it that it was miraculous. I'm sorry, Abaye said that it was miraculous, and Rabbi says, Rabbi Matar said to me, and I saw at the time that they closed the doors, not miraculously, they actually went and they closed the doors. No one was ever crushed in the stampede, trampled in the Azara, except for one Pesach, that there was an older person that was crushed. It was called the Pesach of the crushed. That was overcrowded. Taner Rabbanan started in the Braisa Pamachas Bikish Agrifas Melchitin Einav B'chusa Yisrael. Agrippas, the king, he was a descendant of the Chashmonaim, of Herod, from Herod and the Chashmonai. He was if Herod was married to that Miriam or whatever, the Chashmonai girl that he liked. Anyway, Agrippas was a descendant of Herod, and he put his eyes on the Jewish people, but it was a king over Israel, to see how many people there were. And so Amalei l'Kohen Gadol Teni Necha b'Pesach. He tells the Kohen Gadol the Pesachim, put your eyes on the Korban Pesach to count how many people there are. How does he do this? So Natal Kol Yachas Mikol Echad. He took one kulya, say kidney, right? Took a kidney. And v'nimtzu sham shishim riba yizuge klayas. He found that there were 60,000 pairs of kidneys. Keflaim Ketzim Mitzrayim. Shishim riba, not 60,000. 600,000. Sorry, 10,000. And he was just counting these, how many Korban Pesachs there were. And the way he counted it was he took the kidneys and he counted the kidneys. Yeah, so we're not done yet. And so 60,000 pairs of kidneys.
So he's saying 30,000 were all together. So each group was 10,000. Right?
No.
Well,
no, there were
60,000 kidneys.
There were 600,000, 600,000 kidneys. That means that there were 600,000 groups.
Oh, I thought it was double because,
He's taking the kidneys from the animals.
He's looking at one kidney. Or maybe animals only have one kidney.
No, they're supposed to have two.
They're supposed to have two. So if there's 600,000, he was only taking one from each animal.
Yeah.
So there were 600,000. So we're talking about.
But the way it looks over here is that
groups of 200,000 at a time.
Right. The three groups.
This is getting better and better.
Yeah. This is what I was mentioning before, that it's going to be hard to imagine how this is working. But But it says that zuge klayas. That means that there were really 1,200,000. 1,200,000. And of course, this isn't including the people that weren't able to come because they were distant and they were also, they were going to do the Pesach Sheni. There was no Korban Pesach that didn't have in it at least 10 people. There's a lot of people there. So by Yakarna, I say Pesach move, and they call this the thick Pesach. That means the large crowd. Natal Kolya, the Gemara asks, Natal Kolya, Habayak Tura. What does it mean he took the kidneys? He needed to offer, a kidney is something that goes on the altar. It needs to be burnt. He can't collect them in a pile. He has to burn them. He says, oh, don't worry. The Hadar Makdalu. He went and he offered them. You can't just take these out and just offer all the kidneys separately than the rest of the animal. They have to be offered together with the rest of that sacrifice. Oh, okay. He then went and he offered it together with the rest of the sacrifice. No. They would have to offer it all at the same time. Each sacrifice was burnt together individually. In other words, each one was its own unit. What happened was he would take the kidney, and then they would say, okay, one kidney, and they would put a pebble into a bucket. And afterwards, when they finished all of that counting, then they counted those pebbles, and that's what it was. So they replaced each kidney with something. So it was like a voting sort of thing.
Can I ask you an obvious question? Why didn't they just go to the pebble then? Why the whole thing with the kidney?
Yeah, I guess they didn't want to get confused. They could have done it by head also. Yeah. Why did they use it? Why did they use a kidney? They could have done it with any part of the animal or just the whole animal. Yeah.
I'm gonna take the rest of the day off after that one. Bye.
Yitzi, do you have an explanation?
No, none.
Okay. I know in the Steinsaltz Gemara they said that in Josephus he has this story where one of the Roman emperors wants to find out how many Jewish people there are, and he sends someone to check it out. Anyway, over there it doesn't say Agrippa, but based on what we know from here, that it must have been Agrippa that was being asked for this information.
After this year, I'll call Daniel and we'll get the answer.
Okay. The Kainim would stand in rows. My time, why did they stand in rows? It says that there were rows of gold vessels and rows of silver vessels. Is it because the Mashakli, the Dava Mail, the Kaspa? Okay. The understanding over here is like this. Maybe if they would mix the rows of silver and gold, the person would pass a gold vessel and get back a silver one. And the rule is, Mailim Bakaidash, you're supposed to go up and not go down. He would end up with one that was of lesser value than the one that he had originally. That would mean that he's going down in he's going down in value of the vessel that he's holding. It should always be increasing instead of decreasing. That's one pshat. Another pshat that I'm seeing on the bottom of my Gemara, maybe someone would actually be stealing a gold vessel and replacing it with a silver one. And so I don't know where he would hide it. But if he was in a row of gold, then he couldn't replace it with silver. He would have to have a gold one there. So, but if they were all mixed up, then no one would notice that, oh, you have a silver one? Okay, fine. So the Gemara says, 1 second. Hachanami del Mashakli bar Mas and a Maili bar Meya. 1 second, maybe he's going to get one that's worth 200 and he's going to give back one that's worth 100. Now again, the same to Pshatim. He's going down in holiness, not down in holiness, but in matters of holiness, he's going down. Or maybe he's going to be stealing something. Ella dachi shaper tvei. You're right. It wasn't because of going down in holiness or something like that. It had to do with what looked nice, and it looked nice if they were separate rows of gold and separate rows of silver. It was just simply for yeah. They didn't have bottoms to the bowls that they used to catch the blood. All of the bowls in the Beis Hamikdash did not have bottoms, except for the bowls that were used for the frankincense that were put on the table, on the showbread. If you would put down one that didn't have a bottom, that came to a point, a cone shape, it may end up leaning against the bread and it would break the bread. So they didn't want to do that. So they wanted those bowls to have a bottom. It should rest naturally on the table and it shouldn't break the bread that it was leaning against. Shachat Yisrael b'kibbul hakayim. We're explaining piece by piece of the Mishnah. Yisrael shechted and the kohen received the blood. Leisagi d'lav Yisrael. It needed to be Yisrael. It wasn't good if it wasn't Yisrael. The Gemara says he gufa kamash leno. This is actually what it's teaching us. The shechita bazar kashera, that a non-kohen is allowed to shech. The kibbul a kohen received. Hakamash malan. That's coming to teach us mikabala ve'elach mitzvahs kuna, that from receiving the blood and on, a kohen does the rest of the service. Nice and lachabeira, he passes it to his friend. Shamit minei halacha shlei b'regel havi halacha. It's coming to tell us that the blood being passed without actually walking is considered halacha. Now, there's 4 services that needed to be done by the kohen. Kabbalah, no, shchita, or not actually. 4 services that not including not specifically by the kohen. The 4 services that needed to be done for the animal to be a valid sacrifice. They need to be shchita, kabbalah, halacha, and zrika. Those are the 4 services. Now, the halacha is a machlekes if it actually needs to take place. So, according to one opinion, it needs to take place. Now, here, what's happening is no one is doing the halacha. Halacha means to walk the blood up to the altar. It was reaching the altar without anyone walking because it was this production line. So the Gemara says, Dilmahu nayid porta. Maybe he moved a little bit. If that's the case, then what's the chiddush that they would pass it? You're probably trying to teach me a halacha here, and that walking it is not necessary. It says, no, hakamashman breivam hadras melech. It's teaching me a different chiddush, that the more people you have involved in the service, the more glory it is for the king. It could be teaching me something else. He receives the full cup, the full bowl of blood, and then he returns the empty one. So in other words, he's holding up one, and someone passes him the other one, which he takes, he accepts it, and then he passes the empty one to the person that just passed him, the full one. So, but you don't do it the other way. This supports Reb Shimon ben Lakish, who holds that you never pass over a mitzvah. The kayin that's close to the mizbeach, etc. Man tana Pesach bezrika. Who's the one that holds that the Pesach, Korban Pesach, was the blood was sprinkled and not poured? Amrav Chizda Rabbi Yossi Aglili. It's the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. The Tanya was taught in a brayso. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Aimer. Es damam tizrik al mizbeach v'schalbam takter. The blood is sprinkled on the altar, and the fat is burnt on the altar. Damay lai nemar ela damam. Chelbay lai nemar ela chelbam. What was this pasuk referring to? I think the Bachar. Yeah, referring to the Bachar. It says, it doesn't say its blood, it says their blood, which means that it's coming to include other sacrifices as well. So which goes like this, that it says their blood was sprinkled on the altar and their fat was burnt on the mizbeach. This is teaching us about the firstborn animal, which is a sacrifice, and the meiser animal, the tithing of the animals, which is a sacrifice, and the Korban Pesach, which the blood is sprinkled on the altar the same way it's done by the Bechar. How do I know that it needs to be on the side of the altar that has the foundation, the Yesod, which that's the bottom rim of the Mizbech, because that was only on the north and the west side. We learn, it says sprinkling here, it says sprinkling by the Oila. We learn from the Oila. Over here it says you sprinkle the blood on the altar. And by the Oila it says the burnt offering. That the sons of Aaron sprinkled on the Mizbeach all around. Now, when it says all around, it was actually two sprinkling. One was on the northeast, another one was on the southwest. Now, those are the two corners that it was catty corner. That way, two sprinklings were able to get all four sides. Now, that was the two corners that you could do that would have the side at the corner. The other corner, the southeast corner, did not have the side, so it couldn't have been the other catty corner. Okay. Just like the Oila required the side, the foundation, so too the Korban Pesach. How do we know that the Oila required the side? It just says all around. Amakra, we learn from by the Chatas. It says Al Yeseidim is Mizbach Ha'olam, that the Chatas was the blood was poured on the Yesod, the foundation of the Mizbach Ha'olam, of the altar of the Oila. It needed to say Al Yeseidim Mizbeach. It added in Mizbach Ha'olam to tell me Alma Oila Tuni Yesod. It's coming to tell me that the Oila, the burnt offering, also required the Yesod. Yatsa Katri Shaina, the first group went out. And then the second group came in. The second group went out and the third group came in. Tani Hinikras Katatzlanis, this is called the lazy group. 1 second. Someone needed to be the last, right? My Havalela Mevad, what were they supposed to do? It says, they should have come first. They should have rushed. So the fact that someone needs to be the last doesn't mean that it needed to be you, right? Kedetanya was taught in a brayso, Rabbi Emi Afshala Ilam B'loi Baisim B'loi Borsi. The world needs perfume makers, and it also needs tanners. Ashi Mishim Nasi Baisim Ayloi Lamishim Nasi Borsi. Happy is the one that his job is making perfume, and woe is to the one that his job is working as a tanner. The world can exist without male and without female. Happy is the one that his children are male. Woe is the one that his children are female. Yeah, this Gemara wasn't politically correct. Although I did hear a pshat that happy is the one that his sons are male, and woe is to the one that his sons are female. Now, in the olden days, what this meant was that male children were supposed to act like a man, not combing the hair and not putting on makeup. Okay. The way it was done in the weekday, that's how it was done on Shabbos. But the only thing is that on Shabbos, the sages were not happy with the washing of the floor. When it says it was against the will of the sages, which sages were against the washing the floor on Shabbos? It was against the will of Rabbi Eliezer. Because according to the Rabbanan, they say washing the floor is just a rabbinic law. And rabbinic laws don't apply in the temple. Maihi. What's the source of this? The Tanya was taught in a brayso. Whether someone milks an animal, or he curdles the milk, or he makes it into cheese. That meant he was forming it. They're separating the whey from the curdle, and then you put it in the cheesecloth and you form it you mold it into cheese. Kugregers, the size of a Hamagabin kugregers, if you mold the cheese, not mold the cheese, You form the cheese, the size of a fig, that amount. V'amachabed, someone that sweeps. V'amarabetz, someone that washes the floor. But roy the chalis dvash, or he removes the honey from the honeycomb. Shoygig, the Shabbos chayiv chatas. If he does it on Shabbos, he's chayiv. He has to bring a sin offering. Is it the Yom Tif? If he does it b'mezid on Yom Tif, like a sarbayim, he gets 40 lashes. That's the words of Rebbe Lezer. The sages say no. This is only when it comes to the washing of the floor, the sweeping, and the taking off of the honey, removing the honeycomb, removing the honey from the comb. That's only rabbinic law. And the other ones, milking the animal is mefarek, making the cheese is baina, separating the whey from the curdle is boirer, and Rebbe Lezer holds that washing the floor is smoothing out the holes in the floor. Is making the floor isn't straight. Ashriya Gumas is making the floor straight would be a problem of either plowing or
the floor was stone.
Yeah, that's why it shouldn't have been a problem anyway. But maybe even the stone is possible that it gets filled in by if the tile isn't perfectly smooth, then when you wash it, it's possible that you can fill in some grain into the. I guess that's the pshat. Yeah. The Re asks the question. Yeah, that's Taisa's question. He answers that between the rows of stones, there was the what's it called? What's filled in between
mortar,
the stones?
mortar,
Grout.
mortar,
Grout.
plaster, grout.
The grout. Yeah, that's his first answer. He gives other answers. Maybe it's a gzeira. Okay, that's this Taisus of the Ar Mechaber.
Because it was polished. It was polished because we have a more elsewhere that says it looked like the ocean moving. Remember that?
No, I thought that was the walls.
Oh, you thought that was the wall. I always thought that was the floor.
I think it's the walls because they made it with this plaster or something, and they said we wanted to cover it in gold. They said no, leave it because it looks like the ocean.
Oh, I thought that.
After this year, I'll call Yitzi Kasowitz and we'll get the answer.
Please do, and let us know.
Okay. Ravashi says, Afilu Tema, Shlei Bratzim Chachamim, Reb Nasani. Ravashi says it doesn't have to be that specifically Reb Elazar. It could be Reb Nasan. The Tanya Reb Nasan Shvus Tzricha Yitir, Shvus Shein Tzricha Yitir. They only allowed in the Beis Hamikdash rabbinic laws that were necessary. It wasn't just like there was no rabbinic law in the Beis Hamikdash. It was if it wasn't necessary to wash the floor, they weren't supposed to wash it, even though it's only a rabbinic law. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda says that they would take a cup of the blood that was on the floor and they would sprinkle it on the altar, just in case there was a sacrifice that didn't get sprinkled. So this would cover for that. Tanya was starting the Bryce. This was an extra thing that they did to cover for a sacrifice that the blood spilled. They told Rabbi Yehuda, what are you gaining? It wasn't the blood got spilled with thinking that the blood, they shechted an animal and no one was there to catch the blood. Now you're going to just pick it up off the floor. You know, Yadi, how did they know if it got caught or didn't get caught? This is what they said. What are you trying to accomplish? Maybe that blood was never caught into a keli, and you can't pick the blood off the floor. It has to go into a vessel. I wasn't talking about if it fell straight on the floor. I'm talking about where the Kayan got it in the vessel and then it spilled. Yada, how did he know that that's what he was dealing with? So it says Kayanim Zrizimim. He knows that the Kayanim caught the blood, and because Kayanim they work quickly, so it's impossible that they're efficient. It's impossible that they would have let an animal go and no one was there to catch the blood. The Gemara says, if they're so good, so why they spill it? So Agav Zrizasayu, the Abdi Mishtapich, no, it's the opposite. Because they work so quick, that's why they spilled it. They're working so quick. 1 second. When you take the blood off the floor, you don't have the blood that's acceptable. There's the other blood that comes out later that's not acceptable to be sprinkled. It's only the first spurt of blood that's the blood that's sprinkled. No, this is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that holds that the dam tamtis, this later blood that comes spilling out, that's also acceptable. The Tanya dam tamtis ba'azara says that there's a negative prohibition not to eat the dam tamtis. Now, usually eating blood is kares, right? But dam tamtis is not the real blood; it's only a negative prohibition. Rabbi Yehuda be kares. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Dam tamtis gets kares. You see, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that the dam tamtis, this later blood, is also considered blood. 1 second. You confused me over there because you were talking that brisa was talking about eating. That's not talking about sprinkling on the altar. You had me thinking that Rabbi Yehuda holds that that's real blood because you get kares if you eat it. But Rabbi Elazar says clearly that Rabbi Yehuda never said it regarding sprinkling it on the altar. You need to have the original blood. Only the blood that the life goes out with, because that's the beginning spurt of the blood. The blood that trickles out later is Eina Mechaper. So what are you telling me that Rabbi Yehuda holds that you can use that blood off the floor? It's mixed with other bloods. El Rabbi Yehuda, we have a different logic for Rabbi Yehuda. The logic is Damar Ein Dam Mevatel Dam. Rabbi Yehuda holds that blood in blood doesn't get nullified. So in other words, Rabbi Yehuda's min b'mina is not batal. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. He argues with the Chachamim. He said blood doesn't nullify blood. So even though there's a lot of dam tamtis, but nevertheless the blood that's kosher to be sprinkled is also there. So when you sprinkle the whole thing, you also got the correct blood as well. It was never batal. Tanya. So in Rabbi Yehuda says to the sages, Lama paikim asazara. Why did they stuff up the hole that allowed the blood to drain? Why did they stuff that up? Why did they plug it? Why was it plugged when they were slaughtering this? If, according to you, that you don't take the blood off the floor and sprinkle it, so why were they collecting the blood on the floor? Amalai. So they said to Rabbi Yehuda, Shvachal of Ne'an Shielchalek Ad Arkuvusayim Bedam. It was it's a praise to the sons of Aaron that they should go. What's the Arkuvusayim? The knees or the ankles? I think the knees. That they should be walking until their knees in blood. Does it say knees in English? Vakachayetz. 1 second. There's a problem. You have to walk on the floor of the Azara. You can't walk on blood. It's but it was all over the place, right? So the Gemara, and they had to step. They weren't even allowed to wear shoes. They had to step directly on the floor. So it says lachu v'nechaitzis. When blood is moist, it's not a chatzitza. The Tanya was taught in a brisa. It's talking about using the mikveh. Hadam v'adiyai v'achela v'advash yivesim chaitzitzim. Ink, blood, fat, and honey. If it's dry, then it's a chatzitza. Lachen in chaitzim, but if it's wet, it's not a chatzitza. But the clothing is going to get dirty. Utanan, and it was taught. If his clothing is dirty, well, tashtim doesn't have to mean dirty, but if it's worn, then and he does the avodah, it's puzzle. Maybe they lift up their clothing so that it doesn't get dirty. But Tanya midei bad midei kimidaser shlayachser v'layaser. But what about? It says that the clothing had to be made exactly that it fits perfectly. So it says by lachas evarim lekevish the lava vaydehi. This was done for taking the limbs up to the altar, which is not an avodah, and therefore they didn't have to have the perfect clothing because it wasn't an avodah. This is taking the limbs, not taking the blood. Belay, that's not considered avodah. But Kayan is the one that brings it up, so that is an avodah. The Tanya Vikr Vakayin as a kalam mizbeach. That's why lachas evarim lekevish. It says the Kayan offers it on the mizbeach. This is the limbs getting brought up to the ramp. We're talking about that they were taking the wood to be burnt on the fire. That's not an avodah. But however, by lachas evarim lekevish, by lachas dam miyahechi azli. It's very nice with the answer that you're giving me. But how about there were other things that needed to be done? How did they perform those services? It says the maski, it's to be. There were platforms there, stone, that they were able to walk on, that the blood wasn't on there. They were able to walk along those platforms, but they didn't have to get their clothing dirty in the blood. Okay, how did they hang it and skin it? And they put the innards inside a plate or a bowl to be offered. The people that skinned it, they offered. They were the ones that brought it to the mizbech to put it on. They weren't the kayanim necessarily. No, they put it in a plate to be able to be brought up to the mizbech. The first group went out. Tana kol echad v'echad neisen pischei ba'orei. We're starting in the brisa. Everyone put this covering Pesach together with its skin. They hung it over their back. Amar Rav Elish says, tayes. They looked like they were Arab merchants that had their sack over their back, and that's how they walked out with their covering Pesach. Okay.